Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Sana, and I am one of your hosts this evening. We're going to be talking a little bit about optimizing your residency application despite the circumstances we're currently in and COVID. So we'll be talking a little bit about just residency applications on the whole and how to optimize your application no matter what. And then some things that are specific to COVID and specific to the circumstances that we're in right now. Just some background on myself. My name is Sana. I have been with med school tutors for I think 4 years now. I'm a senior tutor as well as a residency consultant, and I'm excited to chat with you all today. And I will let my co-host introduce herself too.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I have been with MST for, I think, about 5 years now. And I am a PGY3 in internal medicine and soon to be cardiology fellow.
Awesome. So big things, as I sort of alluded to, we're going to go over sort of dates and important things, dates to know, facts to know as you start the process that are important no matter what. We'll talk a little bit about steps you can take to prepare. We know it's early, it's only June, but these things sort of sneak up on you. So how to start to prepare your application and best prepare for the application season. And then we'll also be taking questions throughout, as well as answering questions towards the end with a live Q&A session. So please feel free to throw any questions you have as we're speaking in the chat, but also if we don't get to them right away, we'll try to get to them at the end.
So who we are, if you're not familiar with med school tutors, we are a service of tutors of a wide variety of backgrounds that help with all of the step exams, applying to medical school, residency, and beyond. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to us, there are multiple ways listed here at the bottom.
All right, so diving right in. So the first thing that is important to get a sense of is the calendar. And so if you're not familiar with these dates, definitely put them in your calendar now. So the first thing is on June 9th, so just in about a week, you can register in My ERAS and start to prepare your application. So what that means is you can start to enter some of the, your personal information, your activities, enter in all of those things like your fake resume into the application and work on that all summer. So they give you quite a bit of time to start to prepare that. September 1st is the day when you can start to submit them to residencies. Residencies are not yet able to see it, but you can start to submit them at that point. And then September 29th is the date when all residencies can download your applications and begin reviewing, and your MSTEs will be released to the programs as well so that they can evaluate your transcripts and your grades and also everything else. So big thing is you can start working on it as early as next week. You can start submitting in September, and then residencies won't be able to see anything till the end of September.
And then some more dates, just to be clear, because it is incredibly confusing about ERAS versus NRMP. ERAS is where you put in your application and you apply to the programs. It's where the programs download your application. NRMP is the service that you rank programs on and programs rank you and where the match actually happens. So you have to register with ERAS for your application, and by you're starting on September 15th, you also register with NRMP to enter the match. Then you don't really do anything with NRMP until February 1st, where you can start ranking your programs. March 2nd is when you can no longer edit your list. And then March 14th through 18th is SOAP, and then match day is on the 18th.
All right. So now that we have a brief sort of overview of the timeline and when we should be aiming to have things ready, we want to talk about how to plan for this, the application cycle. So the one big question we get, or sort of two big questions sort of come together, is how much time do I need to prepare my application, and when should I start preparing to apply? So what I'll say is, at this point, most people, so assuming that our audience is mostly people who are planning to apply this cycle, so taking that, most people are certainly are thinking about what specialty they want to apply into, have a good sense of what they're going to be pursuing when they apply in September. Some people may be, deciding between a couple of specialties at this point, maybe relying on Subeyes to sort of differentiate. but most people have sort of narrowed down to what they're thinking about. Personal statements are, in my opinion, the thing that takes the most amount of time to sort of cultivate and create something strong. And so that I would say start as early as you're able to. And sometimes it's a matter of just sitting down and setting an hour on a weekend and saying, okay, why do I want to go into internal medicine? Why do I want to go into, and just start to jot down ideas. And that way it makes it more piecemeal and you're able to do it throughout time. So I would say as early as now is not too early to start working on the personal statement. And then as I was mentioning, putting things into ERAS, sort of chipping away at each activity, because those things actually take quite a bit of time to enter in. If you have free time, start chipping away, start putting those things in as early as you want. But certainly, if you don't have time now, don't stress if you can't do it until August, because that will still give you plenty of time to get everything in. Another big question that we get is how to apply for prelim and PGY2 spots. There are a lot of specialties, radiology included, that require you to do a prelim year. And so I can speak a little bit about that. When you're applying to these programs, so there are some specialties which only offer prelim and advanced programs. So radiology, for example, I believe dermatology is another one. You have to apply to advanced programs for dermatology. So let's say you apply to 10 to 15 dermatology programs. You also apply to 10 to 15 or more or less prelim programs. And those are either in medicine, surgery, or a transitional year. There are some, I believe there may be like one or two prelim OBGYN and PEDS prelim years, but the vast majority, medicine, surgery, TY years. And so you actually are sending applications to all of those programs. So those applicants are often sending 30 plus applications because you're applying to double the number of programs. And then once ranking comes, and we'll have webinars much later on about the ranking process and how that works in, but you're applying to different ones. And you can send different personal statements to them. You can send different things to all of those programs. So something to keep in mind. So that's a caveat for anyone doing that. And then there are also programs that are categorical programs. Anesthesia, for example, allows you to apply to advanced anesthesia programs, or categorical, which have their medicine year built in. So there is some variability depending on the specialty. Another question, which is very difficult to answer, is how many programs should I apply to? And what I'll say is, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but I believe the number that we heard quoted this past year was there was a 20% increase in the number of programs that students applied to for residency during this last COVID application cycle. And whether or not that was necessary, who knows? Because I don't think we yet have the data as to how far down people fell on their list. But there was a significant increase in the number of programs. So, if you also have to sort of take into account your stats, your sort of competitiveness, the specialty you're applying into. A lot of people in dermatology apply to every single program in the country, versus if you're applying into something that's less competitive, it could be and if you're a strong candidate, especially, it could be reasonable to apply to 5, 6, 10 programs. So it really depends on your application and what your goals are, where you're trying to go, and how good of a match you are, or if it's a reach of a program. And then how do I know where to apply? This is a very difficult question. I think I'll start with, think about where you'll be happy in terms of geography, in terms of your family, in terms of your career goals. Are you interested in being an academic? Are you interested in more sort of community clinical experience? And sort of think about what your goals are and think about what makes you happy. And that's sort of the best advice I have for planning where to apply. So I know that's a lot. Sarah, any additional thoughts on anything that I mentioned there?
So I think in terms of the where to apply, if you're someone who doesn't have any particular ties to anywhere in the United States and you're widely open, Doximity has a really great residency navigator where you can plug in what you want to apply into. You can kind of rank programs by their research or clinical, and you can look by state and get a sense of programs. And then it'll link to some information about them regarding how many IMGs they have at their program and different things. So that can be helpful if you're really not familiar with the field.
Definitely.
So now kind of shifting to a little bit more specifics, talking about kind of sub-Is and letters of recommendation. These are probably the two things, besides maybe the personal statement, that you should be thinking about now in terms of the cycle. So some questions that have come up um, is especially this year. So last year there were no real subwise away. This year there's a limit from the AAMC that you can only do one sub-I away, but that's only for in-person sub-Is. There are also opportunities to do virtual sub-Is away, which there's not a limit for. So that is a way to maybe show interest in programs, even though there are constraints due to COVID and restrictions. Another way is programs are offering virtual electives or virtual research projects. So reaching out to programs you might be interested in can be helpful that way. And that kind of gets into the creative solutions for sub-Is, is thinking a little bit outside the box and just looking at the program website for places you're interested in going, or asking residents you know at those programs if there are any of these kind of COVID creative solutions for sub-Is or electives. And then that last part kind of fits in is, who do you ask for letters of recommendation, especially if you're not able to do multiple sub-Is in your specialty. So great potential people would be people from your clinical year at your institution, anyone you've done research with at your institution. You can get sub-Is from away locations if you're able to do those. So it's really an individual choice, kind of looking at the experiences you've had. I don't know if you have any other ideas, Sana, about how to kind of optimize those letters during COVID.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind, and something I try to remind all my students, is that everybody is in the same boat right now, as far as, sub-Is being canceled, delayed, COVID restrictions. So certainly don't think of yourself at a disadvantage. Of course, it would be better to be able to, go and see some of these programs and spend more time showing your strengths and your clinical acumen. But everyone is in the same boat, so try not to stress too much. But yes, as Sarah said, programs are going to be understanding to the fact because of the circumstances. So really using your research mentors, using your sort of clinicians that you've worked with in other contexts. I will say only one of my letters was from a radiologist. So I think it's really, really, and I matched at my top choice. So I think you can absolutely match very, very well. Because what people at the end of the day want to know is that you work hard and that you are very interested and that you care a lot about what the work you do. And that should be the case across every specialty. Hopefully you're working hard throughout all your third year rotations and fourth year rotations. So I think just demonstrating that is what programs are looking for. All right. So I touched on a few of these things already. The first question that we get asked a lot about sort of the personal statement in ERAS. So this is really the bulk of your application, right? Your personal statement is saying, this is declaring myself as why I want to pursue this specialty. What do you need to know about me? And ERAS is sort of all of your resume, right? It's basically just a formatted resume of all of your experiences, all of your research, all of your volunteering in one place. And so the personal statement, as I said, as soon as you start having ideas, jot them down. If you have them now, go for it. I was very much the type of person who, suddenly I'd be struck by inspiration and I'd jot down a couple of phrases and then I'd come back to it and see, okay, how do I sort of use this idea into something a little more cohesive? And, sometimes some people are a little more disciplined about it, setting aside an hour every Sunday to be like, okay, I'm going to sit and I'm going to work on my personal statement today. So however, you guys know yourselves really well by this point and what works for you as far as your, motivational style. So it's certainly reasonable to start now. It's also reasonable to start in 2 months. So whatever works best for you. Tailoring your application is another question we get about different specialties. And what I'll say is every specialty is a little bit different. So speak to people who have gone into the specialty of that you're interested in pursuing. For example, I know that orthopedic surgery really likes you to have a lot of orthopedic surgery research and have worked with a lot of orthopedic surgery clinicians and really wants to see that. And so the emergency medicine folks as well, they really care about seeing emergency medicine experiences. Versus radiology couldn't care less. They really want to see medicine and surgery and just want to see that you work hard in any rotation. So talk to people in the field because they'll have a sense of what program directors are looking for. And so I would say that's really, really what's important. But no matter what, good grades, work hard, strong letters, the things that you already know are the same things that, wouldn't be any news to tell you that. Another important thing that we talk about with a lot of our students is how to address red flags in the application. And so whether that be a particularly low score on a test or whether you had to take time off during medical school or whatever it is, everybody has sort of unique circumstances. I think the best thing is to be, upfront and honest when asked about it. So this may come up more on the interview side. This may not come up in the application itself. It really depends on sort of the nature of the red flag, as you would say. Some people may choose to address it in the application itself, which is completely reasonable if it is appropriate. But I think in general, I would say anything that you consider a red flag, to take ownership of it. And and I think in general, not to quote unquote make excuses for it, just take ownership of it, say what circumstances you were in when that happened and what you've done to sort of improve and show that you're, a strong applicant and that you're now going to be a strong clinician, I think is really what it's all about. Just take ownership of what it was and show how you've grown from whatever it may have been. And whether that be in written form or during the interview is sort of up to your discretion. Talking about COVID is another question we get a lot. And Sarah, you might have a different opinion than me on this, but my general opinion is unless there is some crazy extenuating circumstance, don't do it. And partially because it happened to everybody. This is not a unique experience to you. I think it's happened to absolutely everybody. And B, to be perfectly honest, people are sick of it. I think that it's been on everyone's mind for a year and a half now. And I just don't think that there's that much, unless, again, and I don't know everyone's individual circumstance. So not to say if something, unique has happened to you in the setting of COVID that has really transformed, why you want to go into a specialty, et cetera, then certainly I think it's reasonable. But most of the time, for most people, I think it's probably a no.
I agree.
Yeah.
You also have to recognize that you're talking to doctors who were on the front lines, especially if you're applying places like New York or California that were hit pretty hard. So I think the tone there can be a little bit challenging depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then another just sort of additional question that we see is about study and rotation schedules being disrupted and the timing of step 2, step 3. So step 3, you should be taking during your intern year. So that will happen during your intern year and I shouldn't say that because, so for some people it will happen during their intern years for like prelims, et cetera. A lot of us take it during our intern years. However, I know a lot of people in medicine residencies who take it, maybe their second year, their PGY2 year for step 3. So step 3 doesn't happen until residency. So don't worry about it until then. And then you'll get a sense from your program as to when most people take it and when is a good and flexible time for you to take it, ideally after a lighter rotation when you have a little bit of time to study. Step 2CK, what I'll say is more programs I have found have been wanting to see it before certainly before ranking, but more are wanting to see it, I think, before applications. And as time goes on, I think that will continue to trend that way. At this point, I still think it's reasonable to take it later, not necessarily by September, whatever, that you don't necessarily have to have your score by then. But I think that certainly you should definitely have it done by the winter before programs have to rank you. They shouldn't be waiting on a step score to rank you. So that's sort of my general feeling. But I think in future years it'll get pushed earlier and earlier, and people will at some point need it before they apply in September. What are your thoughts on that, Sarah?
So someone just pointed out in the chat, and that's very true, that
Oh,
for
yeah.
our IMG people, step 3 is a
Mm,
little bit different.
true.
If you have graduated from medical school, which is a requirement to take step 3, but you're not yet in a residency, you can take step 3 to make yourself look a little more competitive. And especially if you have a lower step 1 or step 2 score, that can be very helpful. And then for step 2 CK, I think especially as we're going to that pass fail, I agree that a lot of programs want it up front. And usually there's about a 3-week turnaround time between taking the exam and your score being available to programs. So if you want to make sure your step 2 is available, especially if you're someone who has a lower step 1 score, or other red flags in your application, you might want to take it by mid-August to really be sure that it's going to be there in time by the time programs download your application by the end of September. All right, so now we're shifting a little further into the cycle, going into interviews, ranking, and kind of beyond. So the number one question that everyone wants to know from us, has been Googling, is, will interviews be in person or virtual? The answer is that no one knows. They have not announced it. Some programs have upfront on their website said that they are going to be virtual this year, kind of no matter what the recommendations are. Some programs may choose to do in person unless they're advised otherwise. So I think that remains to be seen. My guess is that at least a significant percentage are going to be virtual, if not all of them. Which then kind of leads into the, how do you optimize the virtual interviews? I feel you. I did all my fellowship interviews from this chair in this room. So it's a little bit different than your usual interview experience. So I think, big, easy things. Make sure you're in a quiet location that you can control the environment. Make sure you have a background that you're comfortable with people knowing about you or seeing what they're seeing. Make sure you have good internet. Have a backup plan, a backup device, or a backup phone in case there are any kind of technical issues. Wear pants. You might need to stand up. So those are all kind of like the basics. And then a lot of people stress, to kind of get into that next question about how can you rank a program if you've never seen it? I have to say that you still get a really great sense of the program. After you've talked to about 10 different people from a place, you get their vibe, you get to ask what resources are available, you get to meet some of the current residents. So I think you will get a sense about what the culture of a program is like from there. It's a little bit harder if you're interviewing at a place in, a state you've never been to. But I have made that choice. I'm going to a fellowship in a state I've never been to, just because the people were so wonderful in this virtual interview. And then the last question we got was how to find support through this process when maybe you may be virtual and you can't go into your dean's office. Hopefully this is shifting back a little bit so that you can get some more in-person support. But I would kind of find out who the right office is of student affairs or dean's office. So there should be a designated department within your medical school that is there to help guide you through the residency application process. This is harder for our people who are already out of medical school or are at foreign medical schools, which may not have a very developed support process. For those people, talk to other people at your medical school who have matched and who they found helpful, or you can reach out to us if we can try to help guide you. There are always people who can kind of walk you through the process. I don't know, Sada, if there's anything that I missed there, or anything you would add.
No, I think you are the perfect person to talk about this, having gone through the virtual process yourself recently. But I think what Sarah said is, I think, really true in that you do get a sense just from talking to people. Having been on the other side, being a part of our residency recruitment, I really think that you can learn a lot about people even online, and get a sense of what's important to the program, what's important to the residents. Do the residents like each other? Do they hang out outside of work? Really take advantage of the I know there were a lot of virtual happy hours this year, but really taking advantage of that to see how the residents interact with each other. Certainly it's not as fun as a real happy hour, but I think you can still learn a lot of valuable information. So really taking advantage of that if you can. All right. So some other additional questions that weren't quite in the previously described categories. So do you have to do research in the field you want to practice in, or is any research good? So I think this is, I mean, my answer to this is going to be pretty, like, I think obvious, but certainly the research in your field is preferred, right? Of course, if you're going into orthopedic surgery, it would be great to have a lot of orthopedic surgery research. However, I think a lot of programs understand that people, don't decide until later in residency or in medical school, excuse me, and sometimes have changes in interest and decide a field is better for them. But at the same time, they want to see that you're academically minded, that you're sort of inquisitive, and that you're sort of clinically interested in answering clinical questions. So any research is a plus. Certainly specialty research is an extra plus, but it certainly won't hurt you if you, choose late and have research in a different field. I think just showing and having a good explanation for it, right? If you're saying, I really thought I was going to do this and I was really interested in it, but ultimately I found myself enjoying this field better and didn't have as much time to have strong clinical projects in it. But, now that I'm in this field, I certainly will continue to pursue it in my future. I think that that's very reasonable, and most people in programs will understand that. And then, does clinical work experience help? I think that any sort of clinical experience is beneficial. Some clinical experience, being on the wards, taking care of patients directly is certainly, I think, the gold standard. And people want to see how you interact with patients on the floors, in the ICUs, in the ORs. And that is the best. And seeing how, how your attendings and residents have felt that you did in those settings is ideal. But certainly showing that you're a really strong MA, showing that you're a really strong scribe, and were really involved in patient care it's never going to hurt you. And so I think certainly, if you have the opportunity to do that, then absolutely use that and continue to strengthen your application that way.
I think especially if you're someone who's outside of medical school now, and you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
stay engaged in the clinical sphere, those clinical experiences can be great. And it can be also a great opportunity to get an extra letter if you're a few years out of medical school,
Absolutely.
um, to show that you're really dedicated to clinical work. So just looping back, now that we've kind of gone through the questions you guys sent in advance, um, Sana and I are both residency consultants. We also have a very large team of other people who come from a variety of schools, backgrounds, etc. And we can help you with any step of this process. So why don't we get into some of the questions from the chat? And feel free to type in anything that's been lingering in your mind up to now.
All right, let me see what we have here. Okay, so one great question we got. So do you tailor your personal statement to specific programs, or did you just have one blanket statement that you sent to all programs? So Sarah, what do you recommend for in regards to personal statements and sending it to programs?
I think you're going to be very tired if you write 45 different personal statements. That being said, if there is a dream program out there for you and you have a specific reason why, you can have one personal statement for them and then another one for other programs. But I think more common, especially if you're someone who's applying very broadly or to locations that it might not be obvious why you would want to move there, having regional personal statements. about what your ties are to the Midwest or the
Yep.
South or the Northeast, to really advocate for yourself. Because, I have lived for my entire life in New York, New Jersey. So convincing a program in Minnesota that that's where I want to go, you have to really, be vocal about that in a personal statement.
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. I think in general, one statement is more than enough. But again, if you have a dream program, certainly I think it's reasonable. But I will say one caveat to that is that, if you're applying to different
Mm.
specialties, because some people sort of will apply IM in family medicine or more broadly, like OBGYN in family medicine. I know a few people who did that. In that case, I think it makes sense, obviously, to cater to the specific specialties. Just double and triple check when you're sending those that they are sent to the correct programs, because I've heard horror stories from that end too. So certainly, depending on what you're applying to, where you're applying to, but I definitely, if you're just applying to one specialty, sort of, no dream programs, just sort of throwing it out there, then one is more than enough.
Great. We got another one here about,
Mm.
can you apply to different programs at the same institution? So can you apply to both surgery and
Mm.
pediatrics at the same institution? Um,
Mm.
I tend to advise people no, because hospitals are small, program directors talk to each other, and it's not going to seem like you're committed to a specialty if you're applying to multiple within an institution, unless you have a really good reason. I don't know if you disagree, Sana.
No, I think I tend to agree with that. Even though, I mean, it's like sort of hard to imagine a world in which the pediatric PD is like running their list by the surgery PD. So I could see it is like a little bit, I would be surprised if they were talking about it, but at the same time, like, why risk it? So I would tend to agree with Sarah that I would probably not, unless it's something like IM FM, because I think that those are like reasonable to be able to sort of explain, like, oh well, I really want to be in this location, and family, I want to do primary care no matter what, and I can get there through either route. Then I think that would be more reasonable. But yeah, probably not.
Definitely.
All right, let's see what we have here. Okay, so one great one is, so programs cannot see our applications until late September. Is there any advantage to submitting early? So no, there's no advantage. So September 1st is when you can start submitting, but you can also, I believe you can submit, you can change it. But September 29th is when, I'm pretty sure it's 29th. 29th is when programs can start to download your application. And my general sort of thought process, and I don't actually know because I've never been on this side of things, is that September 29th is when they start to download, and they probably won't look at it again. So I would say you could submit it on the 28th, you could submit it on the 1st. It makes no difference at all, except for probably your peace of mind. That it has no advantage there.
We have a lot of questions that kind of all range around red flags, whether that's attempts on exams or if this is not your first time in the residency match, um, or time away. I'm kind of lumping all of those things together. So I think in general, when I advise students who have some red flags in their application, I think if they're big ones, you should tackle them in your personal statement. Every program director is going to see whatever it is. You can't hide it in ERAS. And so having a good, you know, part of your personal statement that says, this is what happened, this is why it happened, this is how I grew from it, and this is why I'm going to be a better doctor and resident because of it, just kind of clears the air. And then they can see all the rest of your application and all the good things that you can bring to the table. If you're someone who didn't have red flags, or you did and this is your second time around or multiple times around in the match, I think you have to kind of take a look at what your application looked like last cycle and really think about what were the things that you think held you back. Was it because you submitted your application late? Did you not have a great letter of recommendation? Did you have a low step 2 score? And maybe this is a good year to try for step 3. So, whatever the limiting factor was for you, trying to figure out how you can improve that this time around. Are you someone who's been out of medical school for 5 years and you don't have any clinical experiences? Can you start doing some research? Those are sort of examples. Anything else you'd add?
No, I mean, I think that's perfect. It's sort of, I think that format is really important and I know it sounds a little bit cookie cutter, but just like why it happens, what happens, why it happens, how we grew, why I'm going to be better. I think that is really important. And that's what all the programs are going to be looking for, because people are understanding to the fact that, people go through a lot in their, during medical school and outside of medical school during that time in their life. But just to address that head on.
How do you suggest balancing research and studying? It's the eternal
Hmm.
question. It's going to be even harder when you are a resident and you're trying to do research and be a full-time doctor.
Hmm.
So I think the best advice I can give is as long as you love what you're doing, you'll find time to do it. I'm a resident, I'm a mom, as everyone can probably tell from my background. I also work for med school tutors and I also do cardiology research. And, the ability to time manage is kind of essential to being a doctor, I think, and
Yeah.
really spending your time on the things that you find valuable.
Yeah. I think, yeah, exactly like Sarah said, it's one of those things that you have to sort of find a way to make it work, in order to, be a good doctor. But I think that something that's been very helpful for me is just setting apart discrete time blocks in the day, and not saying like, oh, I have all these things to do, just saying like, okay, this from 7 to 9, this is my research time, and I'm only going to do research. I'm not going to worry about it, the studying, and just setting those like boundaries in my head. And that's not for everyone, right? So everyone functions a little bit differently, but that's something that I found helpful for myself. So
One here that I think maybe you would be a good person to answer is how
yeah.
to vary your personal statements for prelim and transitional years as opposed to your
Mm.
personal statement for your advanced.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'll say is I did have different personal statements for my radiology programs and for my prelim programs, but they were the exact same except for the last paragraph. So I will say my personal statement was all the same about, what I loved about medicine, what I loved about, what drew me to the field of radiology, what I liked about all the other fields. But the last was, at the end of the day, they know you're applying to be a prelim. They know that you're not applying to internal medicine. And so what I tried to do in those prelim TYs is address why I thought a prelim year would be a strong foundation upon which to build my radiology career, or why I thought their transitional year, or like a robust transitional year, would be, the same thing. So I think that in general, most people's personal statements are less, well, I don't know. Different specialties are different, but my personal statement was more about me and my sort of journey through medical school, and less about like radiology. And so because it was so much more about me and sort of all the things that made me what I loved about medicine, I thought that it was easy to apply to multiple different specialties. And just at the end, I tweaked towards, why I want to go to a strong prelim program is because I think it'll give me a good foundation, blah, 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 and do that versus, talking about why I love radiology in the end. So I think that sort of is, how I tailored it, and just, talk about yourself, talk about your journey, and then cater that way.
So I think kind of also going on personal statements, a couple people were asking about, someone asked about whether it should be under a page. You can maybe get away with a couple of sentences on the second page, but it really shouldn't be longer than that.
Yep.
Some program directors will stop reading at the end of that first page.
Yep.
And then some others were asking about, dealing with red flags in the personal statement, how much of your personal business should you share in a personal statement.
Hmm.
If it's a medical issue, if it's a family issue, and that is really up to you.
Yeah.
Programs do not have the right to your privacy, and you can say there was a family crisis or I had a medical problem. You don't have to go into any more specifics than that unless you want to. Some people, want to be very upfront about whatever is going on, especially if it's an ongoing problem that might affect your residency or things in the future.
Right.
How do you
So
know if
one,
you have a
oh,
strong letter of recommendation?
I was just about to pick that one, Sarah. So I'll say short answer is I guess you don't because you never read them. But in general, I think that what a rule of thumb is to, if you're able to, ask people who you feel really confident like you, and I think to ask people who you feel know you well, because it's really easy to write a very generic cookie cutter letter of recommendations. And to be honest, many of mine may have been that. I'll never know. But I think even if you have just one or two people who know you really well, who clinically have seen you and you feel you really connected with, to get a sense from there. And I think another caveat I'll add is when you're asking people for letters, I think make it abundantly easy for them to say no, because just say I know you're super busy. I know you have a lot going on. I completely understand, and I'm more than happy to ask someone else. I just thought that we had a great, rotation together or whatever, and thought you may be able to write me a strong one, but I understand if you can't. Just so give them an out, because most people would rather just say no and not write you a bad one. So I think just give them a lot of outs. Most people will probably say, if they say yes, I'm sure they'll write you a great one. But just give them the option if they don't feel like they can write you a strong one, so that you're not unpleasantly surprised.
I agree. The less awkward you make for them to say no, the better off you are. Because then only people who want to write you that letter are going to write the letter.
Yeah.
Are there any other really good ones that we missed?
All right, let's
Or
see.
if you have
Last
any
question.
last minute
Yeah.
ones you want to throw in?
Yeah, let me see if there's any good last question here. All right. I think we've addressed most of them. I guess maybe we can just do last sort of parting advice.
Sounds good.
All right. So I think in general, I know there's a lot of up in the air in terms of what's going to happen with COVID and interviews and, what the application cycle will look like. I think that what's really important is to remember that everyone is in the same situation as you are, and B, to show that at the end of the day, what people want to see is that you're going to be strong clinically and that you've demonstrated strong clinical strength, even in different specialties, even if it's not what you're going into. And so to really use all of your experiences and sort of leverage them into showing what a great clinician you're going to be. And to try and plan ahead, as much as you're able to try and get on the ball early. The worst thing you can do is just be cramming and trying to get this all done September 28th, right? So if you have time, you have a weekend, just start chipping away at it. It becomes much more easy and less of a daunting task if you do it a little bit at a time.
So I completely agree. So I guess my top 3 closing thoughts would be: 1, try to stay calm and sane. It's an extremely stressful process, but it's also a fun one as you get to explore your different potential futures. So keep that in mind. Second one is kind of what you were saying, is to start everything early. You don't want to be getting down to the wire on anything. Ask for your letters early. It's the polite thing to do, and then they're not doing a rush job. Try to get all of your rotations and your Subeyes done in advance so you can get letters from those if you can, if that's within your control. If it's not, I think programs are going to be much more forgiving, in this year, because everyone has limited exposure or experiences. And then the last one is, if you have a unique circumstance, reach out to us for help.
Yeah.
We have heard everything, seen everything. We can try to help guide you as to how your application can be improved. So there's all of our contact at the bottom here, and we are more than happy to, have a consultation session with you to talk more about your application.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. As Sarah mentioned, all of our contact info is on the slide here. And if you have a moment, please fill out the survey in the chat. It really helps us to give sort of feedback to see if these sessions are useful. And yeah, feel free to reach out. And thank you. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.